It should not have been a black screen, but let's restart then. Let me see, Kiev. When was the last time? Oh, today, actually. The last attack was today.
U.S. President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin are currently taking part in the highly anticipated meeting in Anchorage, Alaska. Peace in Ukraine is on top of the agenda. While departing for Alaska, Trump said he would like to see ceasefire implemented, quote, today.
Yeah, good luck. I don't believe that will happen.
First time the pair is meeting since 2019. The two leaders shook hands as they greeted each other on the red carpet rolled out on the tarmac of the Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson before driving off in the same car. They were then seen sharing a laugh. Speculations on what kind of deal could be reached in Alaska have been popping up, with sources hinting at a potential freeze of the conflict along the current front lines in exchange for lifting of sanctions or a land swap, which, however, has been ruled out by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as going against the country's constitution. Zelensky remained cautiously optimistic ahead of the summit, expressing hope that it would lead to a just peace.
I don't have that hope. I'm very pessimistic, in fact.
High-stakes meeting is also providing space for top officials from both Moscow and Washington to hold bilateral talks. The meetings are expected to run for many hours.
We'll see. Big win already for Putin. There we go. For Putin, the summit is already a big win that he can portray as evidence that years of Western attempts to isolate Russia have unraveled, and that Moscow is retaking its rightful place at the top table of international diplomacy. Trump, who once said he would end Russia's war in Ukraine within 24 hours, conceded on Thursday it had proven a tougher task than he had expected. He said if Friday's talks went well, quickly arranging a second three-way summit with Zelensky would be even more important than his encounter with Putin. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said a three-way summit would be possible if the Alaska talks bore fruit. Interfax news agency reported that Peskov also said Friday's talks could last 6 to 7 hours. Zelensky said the summit should open the way for just peace and three-way talks that included him, but added that Russia was continuing to wage war. A Russian ballistic missile earlier struck Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region, killing one person and wounding another. Because of course, it's time to end the war, and the necessary steps must be taken by Russia. We are counting on America. Good luck. Good luck. Smart guy, because of course Trump has much more respect for Putin than Zelensky. Trump said there is mutual respect between him and Putin. He's a smart guy, been doing it for a long time, but so have I. No, you've not. You've not been doing this for a long time. What do you mean? We get along. There's a good respect level on both sides. Trump said, you've done politics much shorter than Putin did. He also welcomed Putin's decision to bring business people to Alaska. Jesus Christ. But they're not doing business until we get the war settled, he said, repeating a threat of economically severe consequences for Russia if the summit goes badly. The United States has the internal discussions on using Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker vessels to support the development of gas and LNG projects in Alaska as one of the possible deals to aim for, three sources familiar with the matter told Reuters. We'll see. The source familiar with Kremlin thinking said it looked as if the two sides had been able to find some common ground. Apparently some terms will be agreed upon, because Trump cannot be refused and we are not in a position to refuse due to sanctions pressure, said the source, who spoke on condition of anonymity because of the matter's sensitivity. Putin has said he is open to a full ceasefire, but that issues of verification must first be sorted out. One compromise could be a truce in the air war. Zelensky has ruled out formally handing Moscow any territory and is also seeking a security guarantee backed by the United States, which might prove difficult under Donald Trump. We'll see. With not many... Trump-Putin conclude high-stakes summit on Ukraine. There you go. So we could find out what happened. Two leaders began their meeting at the U.S. military joint base Elmendorf-Richardson in Ansorgate at around 11:30 a.m. local time. The event will mark their first face-to-face talks. The meeting concluded around 2 p.m. local time, approximately 2.5 hours after the talks began. Putin and Trump are expected to hold a joint news conference at the conclusion of their meeting. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff accompanied Trump to the meeting, while Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and President aide Yuri Ushakov participated alongside Putin in a 3-on-3 meeting. The discussions will also include a working breakfast and negotiations in a wide format in a 5-on-5 structure. As ongoing discussions between the two world leaders continue, Russia has launched multiple aerial attacks towards Ukraine, because of course it has. Why would it not, right? Why would it stop any attacks during the Alaska summit? The Air Force said that a group of Russian attack drones were en route towards Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, while a Russian CAB glide bomb was deployed targeting Ukraine's frontline regions. Trump and his team boarded Air Force One at the Joint Base Andrews in Maryland just before 8 a.m. local time, starting a 7-hour flight to Alaska. Wow, going from Maryland. That's a good sign. Talking to journalists aboard the plane, Trump said that territorial swaps will be discussed in the talks, but he has got to let Ukraine make that decision, adding he thinks they'll make a proper decision. So he'll basically try to bully and pressure Ukraine to agree to the swaps. That's what I'm reading. But I'm not here to negotiate for Ukraine. That much is clear. The US president said, claiming that Putin will be taking all of Ukraine if Trump were not in office. He also said that Russia may be trying to set the stage for negotiations by fresh drone strikes. Maybe it's just his fabric, his genes, his genetics, but he thinks that gives him strength in negotiating. I think it hurts him, he said, adding he would discuss the matter with Putin. Zelensky has addressed the situation on the front lines, claiming Ukraine is making progress. We're countering attempts by Russian forces to gain a foothold and increasing pressure from our units, Zelensky wrote. Today, a decision has been made to further strengthen this and other areas in Donetsk Oblast. On August 11, Ukrainian Battlefield Monitoring Group Deep State reported that Russian forces had pushed towards the Dobropilya-Kramatorsk highway in eastern Donetsk Oblast, capturing positions in nearby settlements to support further offensive operations. Let's see if there's anything. No, nothing new. Nothing new. Nihil novi. We're gonna have to wait. We're gonna have to wait for any news from the summit. We'll see. Trump's so used to talking out of his ass. I wouldn't be surprised if gas was constantly leaking out. Damn, that is brutal. If Dr. Jones was here, then we would be able to do some live.
Yes, you can see them right here. This is the one who was heading up.
Ooh.
If I'm right, is this the guy that's...
Let me see. There's a live feed. Ooh, there's a live feed. All right, live coverage. There'll be a press conference. How exciting, huh? How exciting. Hi, rules. It ended. We still have a the thing ended, but there's still a press conference that's gonna happen if memory serves, Or did the conference end already? What the press conference already ended? It doesn't look like it did. No, it doesn't look like it did. Like the meeting between Trump and Putin sort of ended, but we still have to have our press conference to learn what happened during it. Damn. Yeah, the meeting ended. Good luck. I'll be so shocked if they will come out and say, well, we decided on a ceasefire that is going into effect right now. Oh, and we're gonna give back Ukraine all of the land, and we're gonna have a nice business deal. Capitalism. Capitalisms.
It's a 3G, 4G phone. It'll work better. You don't have the adapter. Can't break it now. I'm Bluetoothing into mine.
I usually do a USB-C hardwire.
Does that work on USB-C?
So do the new cell phones.
Yeah. I do have that cable. I'm just in the middle of it now.
Yeah, it's fine. The flip phones are a little, they're older.
Yeah.
They don't take as much bandwidth.
Yeah, I'm gonna go grab a hot dog while we wait for the conference, the space conference.
No.
Watch your back, mister.
We're losing a fight.
How exciting. We'll see if we'll get anything.
Robert, over here.
I'll go grab a drink as well. I'm out. When will it start? Jesus.
They're very good.
Why are there so many pro-Russian people in the chat for the conference? Alright. Ready? What a weird chat. How many people are watching this? Not that many, actually.
I want to bring Mary Bruce back into this. She's inside that room. Mary, give me a sense of the room and how quick this scramble was to get everyone back in, because you all learned that there has
19,000
been
watching here.
some sort of wrap to this meeting and some sort of announcement that they're going to want to make together on that stage.
Yeah, certainly a sign that there's some kind of progress
Okay,
here that has been
more
happening. We
people
haven't gotten yet
pro-Ukraine
the official
here.
word
Lol.
that this meeting, that this bilateral meeting that has now been going on for over 3 hours, we haven't been told officially that has wrapped yet. But clearly, as you mentioned, this meeting and their time together was supposed to go on for much longer. They were expected to have that meal together, a bigger sit down between the two delegations. That
right.
has been scrapped.
It lasted
All of us
3 hours.
reporters who were sitting here, getting our questions ready, waiting, sort of hunkering down, expecting several more hours before we would be in this position, suddenly scrambled, racing in here. I'm surrounded by hundreds of reporters, hundreds of cameras, the U.S. press, the White House
I'm not sure if it
delegation,
means
the
that it
Russian
went
press,
well or it
everyone
just went
here
to
now
shit.
sitting at attention, waiting to learn what has happened, what progress, if any, has been
If
made.
any,
As we said, the
if
president had
any.
indicated he would simply walk away if there was not
Oh my God.
something to announce. Clearly, there is now something to announce. It is not just this room that is waiting, it is the world, and it is certainly Ukraine who has the most on the line in this summit, waiting eagerly to learn what has been discussed, what progress has been made. And remember, the president did say that he was going to call President Zelensky as soon as he wrapped up his meeting. Another question that we will have for the president here, David.
Mary, you've covered President Trump for many years. You covered him as a candidate as well.
Oh my God.
And we both know that he knows what 6:30 means back in the United States, that millions of Americans tune in for the evening news. He knows by calling this news conference now that he'll have additional eyes watching whatever comes of this summit.
Regularly does it a bit differently than past presidents, where he just sort of.
I might as well change the title of the
David, I think I
stream.
lost you there for a moment, but certainly I believe you were alluding to President Trump's stagecraft. He certainly understands the timing of broadcasts. He certainly knows that if he wants to get a lot of attention and eyeballs, he knows how to do it, and he certainly is doing just that right now.
Mary Bruce, inside the room as we await a news conference, a joint news conference with President Trump and Vladimir Putin, obviously of Russia, for this historic summit on U.S. soil in Anchorage, Alaska. They have been meeting for more than 2 hours. President Putin had said going into this meeting that he wanted to talk about more than just Ukraine. He was aware that President Trump wanted a ceasefire. He talked about the sincerity of that, the energy of that was complimentary to President Trump. In the days leading up to this summit.
He always says that is going well, so it doesn't tell me anything.
Business relationships and nuclear issues with President Trump as well. Obviously, we'll have to wait to hear what they tell reporters as to what was discussed. You heard Mary talk about the people of Ukraine also waiting to hear if there's been any movement in trying to end this war. I want to bring in Ian Pannell, our chief foreign correspondent. He's in Kyiv. He's covered the war for years now for us. And Ian, I gather many people are up in the middle of the night there waiting to hear if there's been any movement here.
Yeah, that's right, David. I think everyone is fixed onto their TV screens, listening to their radios and waiting to see what the news is, not least, of course, the president of the country, Zelensky, who is promised that phone call from President Trump when this meeting finishes. I think many people were concerned that if it ended quickly, perhaps it was bad news. But if it ends quickly and there's a joint press conference, then perhaps hopes are raised that there could could be a ceasefire.
Oh,
but people are
boy.
going to be very cautious here. They've been burnt before. Ukraine has signed peace deals in the past involving America, involving Russia, that have been broken, promises that have not been kept. So people will want to see the details of this. Stage one, of course, would be a potential ceasefire, but then comes the tricky part of negotiations, potentially a trilateral meeting involving Zelensky, Putin and Trump, but then they've got to try and resolve some of the differences. Russia occupies 20% of Ukrainian land. 1/5 of the territory has Russian troops on it. They're going to have to negotiate what happens to that territory, who controls it, and as well, Russia also maintains its original aims of the war. Set out, we were standing here 3.5 years ago talking to you as the war started. Vladimir Putin saying essentially he doesn't recognize Ukraine as a valid state, doesn't want it allied to the West,
Amazing.
doesn't want it part of NATO, and doesn't want it militarily
Question is,
strong.
how does
so
Trump
how
see it?
are you going to bridge those important differences? Those are the details that will have to be worked out. But if, and it is a large if at this moment, they come onto that stage and they announce that there is a ceasefire, there will be enormous relief in this country. Finally, people will be able to rest, at least for now, and then worry about what comes tomorrow.
We will
it's
see.
impossible to overstate the challenge that lies ahead, whether there is a ceasefire here or not. Ian, something that you just brought up, which I think is really important for our audience, is just to remind them of where this all stands. Of course, Americans have been deeply following the war in Ukraine since the invasion more than 3.5 years ago. And Ian, as you point out, Russian gains, they are now overseeing, if you will, or in control of, at least for now, about 20% of the eastern part of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has signaled that he doesn't want to give any of that up. In fact, there are a couple of areas where he wants more territory. And of course, President Zelensky has said that territory is rightfully belongs to Ukraine and the people of Ukraine, that the Constitution wouldn't allow him to give that up, even though Russia made gains after the invasion. So again, if, and it's a big if, they announce a ceasefire here today, it would seem there's going to be quite a challenge when they get President Zelensky, President Putin, President Trump to a table, if that's what potentially is coming next here.
Yeah, they're ready.
Yeah, it's a huge gulf. It's not just that Vladimir Putin wants that territory. He also changed his constitution. He now enshrines Ukrainian provinces, think of them like American states, as part of Russia. So that would mean changing the Russian constitution
back.
To relinquish that territory, which seems unthinkable. I mean, Russian troops are on the front foot, on the front lines in the east of the country at the moment. They're not taking huge amounts of ground. The front lines have moved marginally over time, and Russian troops are slowly advancing at a cost of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of lives to Russia and to Ukraine. But nevertheless, Ukraine is stretched very, very thin. The flow of weapons, the flow of defensive weapons and offensive weapons.
Of course, Trump might feel like he has landed a success, but it might be horrible for Ukraine.
Agreed to give to Ukraine has effectively stopped. That President Trump has not authorized those long-range weapons to continue to flow. So Ukraine's ability to defend itself has been weakened. Ukraine knows it's on the back foot, but again, Zelensky is in the same position. His constitution enshrines the integrity of Ukrainian land. And that's something that the Europeans have been trying to stress to Donald Trump, that you can't negotiate away the territory. So how do you resolve that? How do you recognize somehow that Russia occupies parts of your land and have a lasting peace? And again, I go back to peace treaties that have been broken before, Ukrainians mistrustful.
Ian, panel in key for us. Ian,
I think anybody that's close geographically to Russia is mistrustful.
So many of us on this team have been to Ukraine a number of times. Martha Raddatz included in that. I've been there. We've brought the broadcast there many times during this war, interviewed President Zelensky in the middle of all of this. And again, as Mary pointed out earlier, President Trump did promise President Zelensky during conversations earlier this week that he would call him after this summit wraps up to give him a readout of what played out. We did show this video. I want to show it again and again. This is a live picture. The moment those two leaders walk out, we'll carry it live, so you're not going to want to tune away. We'll hear from them if there's been progress made here today in Anchorage, Alaska. But moments ago, we got images in of Vladimir Putin. It appeared to show him leaving the summit after more than 2.5 hours or so with President Trump, 2 delegates with Vladimir Putin, 2 delegates, Steve Witkoff and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, with President Trump. I would gather they're preparing to now come out onto that stage in front of the International Press Corps. Rachel Scott is in that room. And Rachel, it's my understanding when we saw everyone sort of hold up their phones there for a moment, I think people at home watching this live might have wondered, does that mean the president's coming out? But Steve Witkoff, the special envoy who was in Russia, helped to set up this summit, who was there again today, was walking into the room.
The biggest incompetent.
There was the special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who walked into the room and sat in the first row there. And there's still several seats that are empty. Witkoff actually just left the room right now. Into the sun. That it's very unclear when exactly this potential press conference is going to be starting. This was a complete and total scramble, the timeline shifting up, the White House calling on officials and calling on us to quickly assemble and come into this area and await for the arrival of President Trump and possibly President Putin. We did notice that they were doing mic checks on 2 of the podiums that are here. Steve Witkoff played a very critical role, as you mentioned, David, in setting up today's summit and today's meeting. I traveled with the president on Air Force One here to Alaska, and it was notable just how aligned his message was with our European allies following a big call that they all had. The president telling me that today his goal is to get Ukraine and Russia to a table to negotiate a ceasefire at some point, but it would be up to Ukraine. It would be ultimately their decision to decide if there are any territorial swaps. Of course, we have heard from Ukrainian President Zelensky, he has been adamant that should
the
not
Polish
happen
president who was requested for by Trump,
the president
said
says
that decisive action must be taken.
Well, Rachel, we have our normal viewers who are watching at 6:30 and those around the country who've tuned in a little earlier than normal because of our live coverage here tonight. And in reading the tea leaves, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, Rachel, but just reading the tea leaves, President Trump said going into this summit that if it didn't go well, he could potentially walk out, return to Washington, but that even if it didn't go well, he would address reporters at least on his own. And the fact that you point out that they tested both mics, that the media has been told to expect a press conference with both leaders would portend perhaps some movement here on trying to get some sort of resolution.
It doesn't mean that it's good for Ukraine, though. It could be. It could mean that Trump sees it as good for himself.
We did get a surprise visitor. It was the president of the United States. He suddenly came back. He spoke to reporters, and he was very clear that he would be willing to walk out of this meeting if he did not get what he needed or did not hear what he needed to from the Russian president. So the sign that, and the fact that this has now gone on, I was in that earlier fray inside of the room when we saw these 2 leaders sitting side by side. I shouted several questions at President Putin about a ceasefire and if he would stop killing Ukrainian civilians. Putin did not respond, although he did appear to whisper something back to me. But just the sign that this has lasted this long is a sign that there could be potential progress.
Even MSNBC's cut is so much.
He was prepared to come out here and address the camera, and now we're waiting to see if President Putin is going to join.
This so much be very embarrassing.
Rachel Scott, part of our team.
This is ABC News, not MSNBC.
Mary Bruce also in the room. And Mary, I see people holding up their cameras right now. And of course, there you go. Some of the dignitaries now entering the room. Sergei Lavrov among them, right there in the front row, part of the Russian delegation.
White House Chief of Staff.
Steve Witkoff, we know, entered the room, then left the room.
God, I hate him. I hate Witkoff, such an idiot.
Chief of Staff for the White House.
He screwed up so bad.
Secretary Bessent, Treasury Secretary Bessent, among others there, part of the U.S. delegation. Of course, in Anchorage, Alaska, for this historic summit with Vladimir Putin. The defense secretary as well. You heard Martha Raddatz talk earlier about how President Trump had said going into this that he would know, and fairly quickly, if there was going to be progress with Vladimir Putin. Halfway through the week, they did lower expectations a bit, saying that this was going to be, in some ways, a listening exercise. But the president remaining optimistic all week long, and even on Air Force One, as Rachel Scott just reported, she was on Air Force One traveling with the president. He sounded optimistic as well. He believed, he said late this week, that Vladimir Putin was coming to this summit because he wanted to make a deal of some sort.
Yeah.
President Trump confident.
It doesn't mean that it's good for Ukraine,
Marco Rubio, who was also in the room with President Trump and Vladimir Putin, along with Steve Witkoff. Of course, we'll learn more about what played out in that room. More than 2.5 hours, this summit in Anchorage, Alaska. We were told that there would be some sort of a working lunch working session of sorts with larger delegations from both countries that would follow the summit itself between these two leaders. We were told that was scrapped. And as we've been reporting here, reporters from the International Press Corps were scrambled, if you will, told to get into the press room more quickly than they thought this would come for this joint press conference. And again, we have been saying here that President Trump had, leading into this summit, said that at the very least, I will address reporters on the backside, even if it's not about what I want it to be. I will take questions from reporters in that audience, but they have been testing both microphones. You can see the Russian delegation there in the front row. Every indication, obviously, is that we're going to hear from both of these leaders on a day when the timing of this was moved up. The working session that followed the summit was scrapped. It would appear, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here, that there has been some sort of progress in this effort to try to get to a ceasefire. And again,
progress is very vague.
That the
we'll
ceasefire
see that if it's progress good for
very important to
Ukraine.
him, and a ceasefire today. But he also acknowledged that the
Ladies
war.
and gentlemen, the President of the United States
Okay,
of America,
let's
go.
The President
of the Russian
of
Federation
the United States and Vladimir Putin taking the stage. Let's watch and let's listen. We'll report on the backside.
Let's see what happens.
Уважаемый господин президент, дамы и господа, наши переговоры прошли в конструктивной и взаимоуважительной атмосфере, были весьма обстоятельными и полезными. Хотел бы еще раз поблагодарить моего американского. Логично встретиться именно здесь, хоть наши страны, хоть нас разделяют океаны, на самом деле. И я, когда мы встретились, вот, вышли из самолетов, я так сказал: добрый день, дорогой сосед, очень приятно видеть вас в добром здравии и живым. И звучит, по-моему, нас разделяет только Берингов пролив.
We're separated by the Strait of Bering, though there are two islands only between the Russian island and the U.S. island. They're only 4 kilometers apart. We're close neighbors, and it's a fact. It's also important that Alaska has to do with our common heritage, common history between Russia and the U.S. Events have to do with that territory. Still, there is tremendous cultural heritage back from the Russian America. For example, Orthodox churches and a lot of more than 700 geographical names of Russian origin. During the Second World War, it was here in Alaska that was the origin of the legendary air bridge for the supply of military aircraft and other equipment under the Lend-Lease program. It was a dangerous and treacherous route over the vast emptiness of ice. However, the pilots of both countries did everything to bring closer the victory. They risked their lives and they gave it all for the common victory. I was just in the city of Magadan in Russia, and there is a memorial there dedicated to the Russian and the U.S. pilots. And there are 2 flags, the U.S. flag and the Russian flag. And I know that here as well, there is such a memorial. There is a military burial place several kilometers away from here. The Soviet pilots that buried there who died during that dangerous mission. We're thankful to the citizens and the government of the U.S. for carefully taking care of their memory. I think that's very worthy and noble. We'll always remember
can we get to the point,
when our
please?
countries defeated common enemies together in the spirit of battle camaraderie and alliance that supported each other and facilitated each other. I'm sure that this heritage will help us rebuild and foster mutually beneficial and equal ties at this new stage, even during the hardest conditions. It is known that there have been no summits between Russia and the U.S. for 4 years, and that's a long time. This time was very hard for bilateral relations, and let's be frank, they've fallen to the lowest point since the Cold War. I think that's not benefiting our countries and the world as a whole. It is apparent that sooner or later we had to amend the situation to move on from the confrontation to dialogue. And in this case, a personal meeting between the heads of state has been long overdue, naturally under the condition of serious and painstaking work. And this work has been done in general. Me and President Trump have very good direct contact. We've spoken multiple times. We spoke frankly on the phone.
I want to know what happened, not some
and special envoy
fluffy nonsense
of the president, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time. And you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. And his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand this history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation. However strange it may sound in these conditions, we have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict. And we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we're prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress.
So I've not heard anything. Nothing.
When the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible. And our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the U.S. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page, to go back to cooperation. It is symbolic that not far away from
what did they agree on?
Between Russia and the U.S., there was a so-called international dateline. I think you can step over, literally, from yesterday into tomorrow. And I hope that we'll succeed in that. In political sphere, I would like to thank President Trump for our joint work, for the well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation. It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the President of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve.
So are we going to hear anything?
He sincerely cares about prosperity of his nation. He understands that
maybe Trump will say
Russia
something
has its
because
own
this
national
is
interests. I expect that today's
fluff.
will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the U.S. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then that it's a big mistake.
You invaded!
Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good, business-like and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, any specifics on what was agreed upon? Any?
Mr. President, that was very profound, and I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones.
Okay,
that
tell
we
them.
haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway.
What? We haven't gotten there?
There's a deal.
Headway?
I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Radcliffe. Thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think, everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with.
I don't know.
We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax. That made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all. But we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax. But what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good, productive meetings over the years.
Is this a joke?
We hope to have that in the future, but let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
As we wait to see if the president will take any questions from the room, there you have it.
What was that?
First addressing reporters, then President Trump addressing reporters as well. Talking about what he called, this is President Trump, an extremely productive meeting. That's how he characterized the summit. He said many points we agreed to. There are some points left, including one point that's pretty significant. Did not go into detail about what that point was. He did say we're going to save thousands of lives, and he believes that President Putin wants that as well, but didn't clearly say flat out that they have agreed to a ceasefire that begins, whenever. That was not declared by either one of these leaders. He also said that he would be contacting NATO and calling President Zelensky, as we had been reporting in our coverage earlier today. President Trump earlier this week promised that he would call President Zelensky after this summit. So a clear indication from President Trump that call has not happened yet, though he fully intends to do so.
Brilliant
he also
meeting.
intends to call his
European
allies in the EU, leaders of, I gather, the UK, France, other countries
this could mean anything.
Have been involved in
and
the coalition
probably
that has supported Ukraine.
Ukraine has to agree to some ridiculous land
Mary
concessions.
Bruce, who is in the press briefing room. And Mary, if you can hear me, I'm just bringing
Nothing
the audience
burger. Literally,
here on what we have
worse than nothing
just
burger. A
witnessed
bunch
here
of
together
filler.
live on the air. Again, President Trump
We've been told
extremely
nothing.
Productive, saying many points agreed to, some points
He always
left.
says
He
that.
said one
He
point
always
is
says
pretty significant,
that.
but he suggested that perhaps we could get there. I did not hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, I did not hear any declaration of a ceasefire.
Yeah, I did not hear anything.
No, you certainly did not. And I have to say, I don't think I've ever been left after hearing from the President of the United States with so many questions. They both came out in these short remarks suggesting that progress has been made. Vladimir Putin using the word agreement, saying
They both
expect
said
that today's
nothing.
agreement will be a good starting point. The President
They probably agreed to something among themselves, and now they will try to pressure Ukraine to agree to something ridiculous, and the whole thing will hinge on it. I'm already telling you.
What is the progress? That is the big question, and one that we still
Because
do
they
not have
mentioned
the answer
Ukraine
to.
will
This
have
was
to agree to some
incredibly
things.
vague. And I have to say, with quite literally the entire world watching, with the future of Ukraine hanging in the balance, to not have any clarity here is pretty astounding. Now, President Trump said he was going, obviously, to be speaking with Ukrainian President Zelensky. He was hoping that coming out of this meeting that they were going to have a ceasefire and that he was going to be announcing a trilateral.
Trump's the kind of guy that would brag if he achieved something right away. Yeah. I mean, he openly said that he didn't, that they didn't get there, and that they feel that it's close, that they might,
So
and that
Mary,
Ukraine will have to
perhaps
agree
I'll
to
give you a
some
little
things.
break here for our
That's the
audience
only
at
thing
home.
that
We're
we
going to
know.
stay on the air through 7:30 Eastern here for another 20 minutes or so. We're going to let our White House teams do some reporting here in the meantime. Mary and Rachel Scott
my
are
God.
also traveling with the president to try to see if we can get some clarity from the White House about what this agreement is, because you did hear Vladimir Putin there at the top of the press conference, as Mary just alluded to, and I heard it as well. Vladimir Putin saying that they had reached an agreement, though he did not offer any details of what this agreement would be. Vladimir Putin talking about the relationship between the U.S. and Russia, the chilliness to that relationship for a very long time. He said it was time to re-engage both countries. He talked about Alaska too, by the way, and the history of Alaska, which, by the way, was sold to the U.S. back in 1867. Many of you have read that in the coverage leading up to this summit. Sold for $7.2 million back in 1867. Talked about the history of Alaska. The common heritage, he called it. Vladimir Putin then went on to talk about the economy and about trade with the U.S., talked about the trustworthy nature of the conversation with President Trump and the others who were in the room from the Trump administration. And he used the word agreement. We all took note of that.
Them said anything,
and we
it's
were
just a
hoping
big
that when
bust.
President
It's just
Trump
a
began
big
speaking, that perhaps he would shed some light on what
waste
this
of time.
agreement is. So when President Trump began speaking, you all heard it with us at home. He said it was an extremely productive meeting. Many points agreed
he
to,
always
some
says
points
that.
left, and I
He
have the actual
always
quote
says that
here because I
about
think
all of
this is
his
the most
talks.
clarity we had
That it's productive.
from President
And
Trump.
then Ukraine gets
we had
bombed.
An extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to.
It's a
There
meaningless
are just a few
statement.
that are left. Some are not
Meaningless.
that significant. One is probably
Empty.
the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I guess my notes were pretty close to what the actual quote was. Martha Raddatz, our chief global affairs anchor, is on the ground in Anchorage. And Martha, we knew this would be high stakes. President Trump used those words going into this summit. And as of now, there is not much clarity as to what this agreement
Not much
Vladimir
clarity.
Putin,
They said nothing.
noted is. And certainly they did not use the word ceasefire.
They did not use that word at all, and that's what President Trump said. Unless he had a ceasefire at the end of these meetings, there would be severe consequences. It certainly doesn't
Didn't even
sound
give
like
anything to discuss
like
for
that
this
is
stream.
going to
I
happen.
know! What
But as
the
Mary
hell
said,
is
it
this?
was completely vague. I think all of us were sitting there waiting
What
for
the hell?
Donald Trump to announce just what an agreement was, if there was an agreement, and we got nothing.
like-
In my notes, David, I have that Donald Trump said no deal until there is a deal. So that's probably the firmest thing he said, that there was no deal, even though he said there was progress in these.
What the hell is
several
happening?
different
What am I
points.
even doing
And,
here?
You know, obviously the Russians have several sticking points. Ukraine has a lot of sticking points, and we don't know exactly what Donald Trump believes was agreed upon in this meeting. But it does not sound, and he certainly did not announce any kind of ceasefire, and that is what Donald Trump said he wanted, and it doesn't appear that's what he got. Is there progress in that relationship? Vladimir Putin seemed very happy about the meeting and getting to meet
that
with Donald
does not
Trump
make
again.
me feel
You
good,
heard the
okay?
president
That
also bring
Putin
up what he
is
calls the Russia
happy.
hoax. That in 2018 is what he talked about a
He
lot.
always
But
brings
this
it
meeting,
up,
there is so
non-stop.
much at stake.
He
The
always
future
brings
of
it up.
Ukraine, people on the ground, war, and the incredible toll that war has taken over these past 3 years. So the call
What a
to
joke.
Zelensky, I don't think he is going to be pleased about that call, because just listening to Vladimir Putin say how the relationship has changed and that they're talking again is not necessarily going to please Zelensky. David.
Well, Martha, your notes match mine. I have here no deal until there's a deal, according to President Trump, and that he then went on to say, I will be calling NATO shortly, and I will be calling President Zelensky, of course, of Ukraine. And as I had mentioned,
remarkably well,
a conversation
Putin's
earlier in the
envoy
week
says.
involving President Trump, European leaders, and President Zelensky, during which President Trump
I'm so
promised
happy that
President
Russia's
Zelensky that
happy
he
with
would
this.
call him right after the summit.
That's
President
a bad
Trump telling the
sign.
world that the call hasn't happened, though he
That
fully
is a
intends
bad
to do
sign that
I
Russia
want to
is
bring in our
happy
chief
with this
foreign
summit.
correspondent, Ian Pannell, because, Ian, you were watching this play out live right along with the rest of us. You've spent a lot of time in Ukraine. What did you read into what you heard? And you and I were talking before they came out on that stage and talked about.
I read that Ukraine is going to be put before a difficult choice, and the whole thing will hinge on it. That's what I heard.
Left one pretty significant point. I would gather, once we learn the details of this, the significant point likely involves much of that land and who is going to get much of this 20% of this territory that Russia fully intends to hold on to, and that Ukraine has signaled it's not willing to give up.
Yeah, I think there's far more that we don't know than we do know after that press conference. I think many people were sat glued watching the TV, waiting to hear what the announcement was, and are rather perplexed now. I think the cynics would say there was much ado about nothing. There was no mention of a ceasefire.
I am a cynic,
the war continues. There's no indication that the guns will stop firing, the drones will stop flying, the ballistic missiles will stop landing on civilian buildings across the country.
This is even worse than I thought.
Will continue to shoot at each other on the front line.
This is even worse than I thought.
At the moment, in the details that we have, there's no indication of an immediate relief for the Ukrainian people. President Zelensky will be waiting for that phone call from Donald Trump to find out what it is that they did discuss. As you say, Vladimir Putin indicated there was an agreement. President Trump didn't go that far. He said there's no deal until there is a deal. So what are the details? And if you can't even get to the first stage of agreeing, which is what Ukraine have been pushing for, with American backing, with the backing of the so-called coalition of the willing, Britain, France and Germany, as well as other allies, that you start with the ceasefire and then you go on to negotiate all those difficult details.
Good luck.
What you do
I never
with the land
believed that would happen.
What do you do with the 20,000 children that have been taken by Russia? How do
I bet they never even
discussed
discussed this, the children.
That was supposed to be the way that this happened, but they didn't. As
Her already planned night with watching discussions. I guess no such thing. Good luck. Jesus Christ, this is such a disappointment.
And that is going to be deeply disappointing to many people here. If you're sat at home with your children close in arms, worrying about whether or not the drones will start flying again tonight, you just heard no relief at all.
So again, 7:16 here in the East. We're going to stay on the air until 7:30 to see if we can get any more reporting on this. Ian Pannell, of course, our chief foreign correspondent, who is in the capital of Kyiv, reporting on how Ukrainians are likely going to receive this news, that even though President Zelensky was not at the table and they were not happy about that, they were very hopeful that President Trump would be able to convince Vladimir Putin to at least establish a ceasefire. President Trump made that very clear on Air Force One again today on his way to Anchorage, Alaska, that he wanted the ceasefire and he wanted it today. And he said if there wasn't one, he would not be happy. Here is that quote. I asked for a full read out. I just want to make sure that everyone's up to speed at home on this. This is the quote from President Trump a short time ago. There were many, many points that we agreed on. Most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite got there, but we've made.
The only concrete thing that we've heard so far is that Ukraine will have to agree to something, probably land-related, for any of this to work.
President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting, and so ultimately up to them. up to them. And Mary Bruce,
It
our
should
chief
have
White House
taught you a
correspondent,
lesson,
I want
yeah.
to go back to you in the room. Obviously, the major unanswered questions. We heard Vladimir Putin use the word agreement. Any more reporting on what that could entail? And then obviously President Trump, you know, I also take note, it's very rare that President Trump would hold a sort of a news conference like this and then not take any questions on the backside. You know, there's a critique of all sorts of critiques of presidents in the past, some who wouldn't take questions, some who took too many. That is not something that people have critiqued President Trump for. He often takes questions, and it was quite notable that he left the stage even though there were questions being shouted out and did not take any of them.
Yeah, it is incredibly rare for President Trump to come anywhere near the White House press corps and not take at least a few questions, especially on such a grand stage as this, when he knows that everyone is waiting and trying to figure out what came of this meeting. And we are still trying to get clarity on that. I can tell you our entire team is frantically trying to figure out what progress has been made. You heard Vladimir Putin, as you said, mention that there's been an agreement. The president, you read that quote from him. He went on to say, we didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. Well, we still don't know exactly what that means. What remains to be worked out? What was the progress that was made? And you have to remember that going in to today's meeting, the president was well aware that he was facing a lot of criticism and pushback and concerns that he was already handing Vladimir Putin a win simply by meeting with him, simply by essentially bringing Vladimir Putin out of the isolation that he has faced from Western leaders for the last 3.5 years since he invaded Ukraine. Vladimir Putin today got a lot of what he wanted. He got this huge photo op, that friendly welcome from President Trump, the two of them rather chummy on the red carpet on the tarmac earlier today, then meeting one-on-one for 3 hours. More than that, Vladimir Putin had a chance to discuss other issues we know beyond Ukraine with President Trump and his delegation, things like nuclear arms control, trade, economic cooperation. It appears for now he still doesn't have to have a ceasefire. And that is something that Vladimir Putin certainly does not want right now, even though Ukraine and Western leaders are trying to up the pressure on him to do that. And as Martha and you were discussing earlier, for now he avoids those punishing sanctions.
He could just say that this is an introduction to further talks, but no, he had to hype it up. True.
To put new punishing sanctions on Vladimir Putin. Instead of that, he has avoided those sanctions. He has gotten this one-on-one, face-to-face to make his case on Ukraine and a host of other issues to President Trump, and he still does not have to. It appears for now he hasn't agreed to a ceasefire, David.
That's right. So just let's underscore
yeah, that's because Putin is playing Trump like a fiddle.
Reporting for the
it's pretty. That much is pretty obvious.
The sanctions that were set to go into effect. Suddenly the sanctions
if Putin is happy and Trump is reserved, that means that things are not good.
Would be invited to American soil for this summit. The president making the argument that nothing has worked until now, that this is worth a shot to bring him here to America, to give him this invite. The sanctions were taken off the table. Then this week, in your reporting and in others from our team, President Trump did say from the White House that if there was not a ceasefire, if there was not progress, there would be, in his words, severe consequences. So that remains, again, the sanctions, the threat of potentially severe consequences. You have to put that up against the signal that we heard from President Trump about some points left. One of them's pretty significant. The president also looking past sort of the conflict in Ukraine, talking about better relations and in particular business relations with Russia. We didn't hear about sanctions or severe consequences, and we didn't hear, obviously, about any agreement in the short term.
It was also very productive, as always.
No, we did not. And look, the president had said,
listen, they always,
if they didn't reach a ceasefire,
Trump always says that is productive.
Punishing economic sanctions, even though President Trump, by his own admission, has previously conceded that sanctions really don't bother Vladimir Putin. They haven't certainly done much to move the ball in the past, but he was promising that if they couldn't reach a ceasefire here, that there would be consequences. That's one of many questions remaining here. Will there still be those consequences? And of course, he also said that if they didn't reach a ceasefire, he was going to walk away. Well, it certainly didn't look like he was walking away. Based on the brief remarks that we heard here just moments ago, it seems like he is saying, you know, let's still give this a go, even though the president clearly didn't get exactly what he wanted here.
So many questions here, Mary.
This is such a failure. Such a failure on Donald Trump's part.
You've put in some calls just to see if we can get some clarity. Mary, thank you for your reporting. Rachel Scott will be traveling She's in the press pool, traveling with the president back on Air Force One if and when he takes flight to get back to Washington. And she was able to get questions to him on the way here as well. So perhaps that will be a window into dealing with here what we should be reporting on as far as
some clarity.
What's been achieved or what hasn't, quite frankly. I want to bring back in Martha Raddatz because, Martha, not only have you and I traveled to Ukraine, you recently were in Russia. You witnessed
I've traveled to Ukraine.
in that country what it has been like with Vladimir Putin not getting the attention of Western leaders. He hasn't since the invasion of Ukraine. And you juxtapose that with the images of him arriving in Anchorage, Alaska today, a very warm welcome embrace on the red carpet, and perhaps one of the most telling images that actually just sort of traveled the world almost immediately was Vladimir Putin's smile through the presidential limousine when he got into the what's called the Beast with President Trump to travel to the summit together.
It's so great. I love it when that happens. I love when things are predictable.
Vladimir Putin is exactly what he was looking for.
Lovely.
I think it's exactly what he was looking for, David, especially, as you said, in the backseat in the Beast, alone
Lovely.
with President Trump, side by side in the U.S. presidential limousine. Now, in Russia, when I was there, he had the military parades there that are an incredible sight to see, lots of goose-stepping
Did you read that book on socialism?
I also,
Yeah,
on that
I'm
day
still
in
reading
May,
it.
interviewed Dmitry
It's really
Peskov,
good.
his spokesperson, and I asked him about those sanctions and
It
just what
talks
Mary was
about
saying.
how
He said, well, I understand there's
the
pressure
speech
to
is
speed up
over.
the process, but you know, it's very hard to threaten
the
Russia
press
with
conference is over.
sanctions.
So
We are a
basically,
country that is not loaded.
both of them said nothing. Putin was just pining on how the relations between Russia and the US is getting so much better, how it's all great, how things are improving. Trump said that it was very productive, great progress was made, almost all of the points were discussed, but actually on the most important points they haven't gotten anywhere, but he feels like they're close to getting somewhere, and also Ukraine will have to agree to some things, and he hopes Ukraine will agree to some things. So basically, none of them said anything. We don't know nothing. We have no clue what they agreed to. We have no clue what they did not agree to. We have no clue what is expected for Ukraine to agree to. I assume it's territory related, but all I can do is speculate because, again, none of them said anything. None of them said anything. It was a bunch of empty nothing. It was a waste of time, this whole conference. Oh yeah, and of course, Trump took no questions from the press. No questions from the press whatsoever. So this was a dud. And here we are. Here we are. Peace is no closer to happening. Russia is launching, as we speak, attacks on Ukraine. I believe that there are still territories in Ukraine that are under... yes, as we speak. Sumy region is under air siren. Kharkiv, Poltava, okay, of course Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia. Of course there's air sirens. Of course, naturally. Fido! Hold on one moment. Fido is doing something stupid again. Fido. So yeah, 1 million Russian soldiers dead in this entire war. Dead or casualties, because casualties are not deaths. Casualties mean wounded as well. So if it's casualties, then it does not mean death. Fido. I'm so annoyed with this nonsense. It's just... I was expecting to learn anything. Something.
Questions remain,
anything.
with no ceasefire or details announced.
There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them.
I swear to God, I expected to learn anything. Anything at all.
I would say a couple of big ones that we haven't
But no,
quite got.
we got nothing. We, of course, got absolutely nothing. Nada, zero, zilch, nothing. My goodness. Well, that is what happens. I guess I'll be going back to Ukraine a lot, it seems. I would have been so surprised if they went out to the podiums and said, well, you know, we decided on a ceasefire. The ceasefire comes into effect, like effective immediately. And we're going to move from here. We're going to discuss what sort of things we can agree or disagree to. And that would have been productive. But this was just a bunch of nothing. Yeah, Ukraine under silence. Oh, Pila City. Mass media reports about explosions. Brilliant. Brilliant. Slavyansk, same. Explosions. Art of the deal. The art of the deal. Let's see if Twitter's talking about saying something about this mess. See if something's happening on Twitter.
I'm going to be happy if it's not today.
Oh.
Everyone said it can't be today, but I'm just saying I want the killing to stop. I'm in this to stop the killing.
But overnight, Russia continuing its bombardment of Ukraine.
Whoops.
Our Rachel Scott asking the president about Putin's decision to launch those strikes.
We saw that Russia continued its violence into Ukraine last night, launching even more drones. What did you make of that?
I think they're trying to negotiate. Maybe it's just his fabric, his genes, his genetics, but he thinks that makes him, gives him strength in negotiating. I think it hurts him.
But for Ukraine's President Zelensky, who was not invited to today's summit, the Russian strikes prove there is no, quote, indication Moscow is preparing to end this war. On the day of the negotiations,
what a shock.
They also kill people, he added, and that says a lot.
Mr. Putin, will you not killing any more civilians?
That ceasefire top of mind for President Trump as he went behind closed doors with Putin. Joining him, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff, who helped arrange this summit. Putin accompanied by Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his top foreign advisor,
Did not
Yuri
happen.
Ushakov.
Did not happen.
Trump is hoping this summit will set the stage for a second meeting with Putin and
Motherfucker
Zelensky.
shook his
And
head.
he says what comes next to countries, including what Trump has called swapping of territories.
I've got to let Ukraine make that decision, and I think they'll make a proper decision. But I'm not here to negotiate for Ukraine. I'm here to get them at a table.
Putin wants to broaden today's talks to cover nuclear weapons and economic cooperation with the United States.
I noticed he's bringing a lot of business people from Russia, and that's good. I like that because they want to do business, but they're not doing business until we get the war settled.
Zelensky declaring the fate of Ukraine hangs in the balance.
Yeah.
We count on a strong position from America, he says. Everything will depend on this.
Let's get right to our Patrick Reevell in London. Patrick, you have been covering this war from the very beginning. President Trump says he wouldn't be happy without a ceasefire. These foreign leaders obviously wanted a win today. We heard the president say great progress was made, but still no ceasefire. In your view, without a final deal here, who wins, who loses?
Hey, Kira, yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, most people watching this are confused and trying to understand where do we now stand. I think, without question,
I am confused.
Vladimir Putin has had a very good day. He has not been forced to impose a ceasefire. He is not going to face tougher sanctions yet. But as you say, President Trump saying that great progress has been made
means
Vladimir
nothing.
Putin had actually been reached, but not giving any details. And President Trump didn't go as far as that, saying there's no deal until a deal is reached. And he suggested that there was one big point.
It feels like there's a difference between these two and how much they're satisfied with this.
He's now going to speak with Ukraine and also with NATO and European countries. I think we will learn from those countries pretty quickly whether this proposal that the two leaders have come up with is something substantial and real and plausible that Ukraine
really explain to me,
or is it ultimately just
explain me my
the
confusion, genius.
that we've seen that haven't really been real negotiations because Vladimir Putin hasn't been putting forward plausible ideas to end the war. If he simply
what a baffling meeting,
put them to President Trump, and now he goes to Ukraine and Europe with ideas that are unacceptable, such as again handing over sways of Ukrainian territory, then it means that really nothing was achieved by the summit, and simply Vladimir Putin was able to get this enormous success for propaganda and PR, and also
breaking the isolation.
It's true, we do have to wait and see. It's possible, you know, Vladimir Putin said in his speech that he said that Ukraine also needs to have security guarantees, that he understands that, and that suggests
that
there
means
is
nothing.
some kind of idea that they were discussing.
That means
we'll find
nothing.
out again if that's meaningful or not, but certainly without question, this has been a very good day for Vladimir Putin, Kira.
Well, we heard in that press conference, Vladimir Putin call Ukraine a brotherly nation.
Yeah.
What did you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't surprising because throughout this war, even as he has been launching missiles every night and killing thousands of Ukrainians, Vladimir Putin has repeated over and over that Ukraine is basically part of Russia. It's part of his approach, and it's part of why
they've enshrined it in the constitution.
That he denies the
much.
existence of Ukraine, and is why they say that he's waging a genocide against them. He believes that Ukraine is essentially part of Russia, a key part of the Russian Empire. And to him, ultimately, there's no difference between Russians and Ukrainians. Obviously, Ukrainians strongly disagree with that. And I think what we saw there again is Vladimir Putin has not changed his spots at all. His view of the war
what a
remains
shock.
the same. His ideas of Ukraine.
The thing that Russia has been repeating consistently over and over and over again proved to be true. The stances have not changed. Trump, once again, has been proven to be quite the poor negotiator, even though he supposedly wrote a whole book on the deal, the art of the deal. It feels like what a joke when he said, we discussed the most important points, we didn't get there, we might get there, we're getting closer, Ukraine will need to agree to some things, things are going forward, it's been very productive, all those vague terms that basically mean nothing. And here we are, once again. Time's ticking and people are dying. And the frontline situation is deteriorating.
Remain the same. We now just have to wait and see. Has he finally decided that he can try and achieve his goal of subjugating Ukraine, perhaps through other means than continuing the war right now? But for now, there is no ceasefire. There's been attacks overnight in Ukraine. The fighting continues to rage on the front line. And there's every reason to think that Vladimir Putin will try to drag this out further so that his troops can make more progress in the weeks to come, Kira.
All right, Patrick Reevell, appreciate your reporting, of course. And for more on the state of the battle, our ABC contributor and retired Colonel Steve Ganyard. Steve, what do you make of what you just heard there from President Trump and President Putin?
Yeah, Kira, I think it would be unrealistic to think that we were going to get a ceasefire tonight. If you think about it, Putin is a very wily negotiator.
We didn't get there. Trump Putin failed to reach deal to end war in Ukraine. What a
countrymen.
I'm so surprised.
For him to say, here's a ceasefire, and go home, and people will say, well, what did you get for it? He was not offered anything, so there was no real negotiation. Yes, he got the one-on-one with President Trump here, but the real negotiations are going to take time. I do think that there's a positive aspect here, though. At the end, President Trump said, we'll see you pretty soon. I also think that the Trump team would have walked away if they did not believe that...
I'm going to go to the toilet now. I'm very disappointed. We'll see. For now, I'm going to do something else. If there's any new breakthrough, I guess we'll cover it. But for now, I don't know. Write in the chat what you would like me to do when I'm in the toilet, because this is not good. I am willing to bet money that the topic of the kidnapped children has not even been mentioned during this whole conversation. My topic of work, I'm willing to bet, has not even been mentioned briefly. Maybe I am wrong, but I doubt it. By the way, I saw that there was some Republican survey that said that the Democrats are gonna win in North Carolina, which is a red state. Oh, cool. Some good news for once. We'll see. We'll see, because so far it seems like nothing was achieved. This is just, my goodness. What amazing allies Ukraine has, huh? What amazing allies. Even with any more developments.
Peskov went back to that very point as well. We don't know whether this is the sticking point now that Donald Trump talked about, but this is what Peskov said, because I said...
What did Peskov say?
A couple of months ago, I was in Moscow, and I interviewed Dmitry Peskov, and Dmitry Peskov went back to that very point as well. We don't know whether this is the sticking point now that Donald Trump talked about, but this term settlement must resolve the underlying conditions.
Oh my God, yeah, or whatever. They say that all the time. Every single time they talk about the underlying whatever. Ukrainian voices left out of the Trump Putin meeting. The Kyiv Independent visited in the frontline city of Kramatorsk in Donetsk Oblast to hear from its residents what they think about the prospects of land swaps between Ukraine and Russia ahead of the Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska. Oh, well.
If we can get the war solved, we'll be very happy.
Tensions are high this week as U.S. President Donald Trump,
born and raised in Kramatorsk, she is firmly against conceding her family's home to Russia in any peace deal.
I don't understand why this meeting is taking place without our President Zelensky, without Europe.
Понятно, почему встреча без нашего президента Зеленского, без его. Вот. И
What the hell?
я думаю, не закончится.
I don't think these negotiations will result in anything. Well, well said, because it seems like it didn't. So, this person has great insight and hindsight.
Потому что нету
Because there is no Ukrainian representation.
украинской позиции, и я знаю, что
And I know that Volodymyr Zelensky won't give up any of our regions.
Владимир Александрович не сдаст никакие наши области, и это было бы вообще
Because that would be very wrong. It doesn't correspond to our constitution.
неправильно. Это не отвечает нашей конституции. Я верю
I believe
в
that the next Oblast, as well as Luhansk Oblast, will be part of Ukraine. That might be difficult, though.
что Донецкая область, как и Луганская область, будет Украиной, как и Крым,
As
как
well
и
as Crimea, Kherson Oblast, and Zaporizhia Oblast.
Херсонская область. Вот,
In the best. I want to believe in the best outcome.
Потому что у меня 2 детей, и я
Because I have 2 children and I want a stable peace in my region.
хочу стабильного мира в своей области, в любимой своей
In
родной
my native beloved region.
области.
Ви переживаєте
Do you worry about your children, your family?
ваших дітей, ваші сім'ї?
Безусловно.
Of course.
Безусловно,
Of course I
переживаю,
worry, but for now we are analyzing the situation.
но пока мы анализируем ситуацию, и пока мы
And for now, we will stay in Kramatorsk.
остаемся в Краматорске.
So yeah, that the people are very scared of the possible situation in which they will get screwed over and will just become part of Russia. Yeah, they called it off. They called off a whole bunch of things, actually. They called off a whole additional meeting. No deal, no nothing. We got nothing. Let's see what Twitter says about this. What a wonderful development, huh? I'm gonna type Alaska and see newest tweets on Alaska. What happens? Breaking news! President Putin lays flowers at graves of Soviet soldiers in Alaska, former territory of the Russian Empire. Wow, that is so amazing. Woof. The idea that Putin believes there's a positive deal for him in the near future is deeply alarming. No ceasefire. Putin brought an icon of Saint Herman of Alaska, an important Orthodox Christian saint for North Americans, as a gift for priests in Anchorage. He also gave him an icon of the Theotokos to mark the Feast of Dormition. Putin speaking about how Russian roots run deeply through Alaska, like he was laying claim, made me very uncomfortable. Trump bringing up Russia, and calling it a hoax was disturbing. We have a lot to be worried about. I'm leaving you. What a team, I know. Well, no new news, I guess, so far. That's all that we get. Brilliant. There's supposed to be another guy from the US, forgot his name, but Russia said he was too pro-Ukraine. Oh, who was it? Who was it? Out of curiosity. Breaking. Russian defense minister. The mood is excellent after negotiations in Alaska. Oh, I feel so good about the fact that Russian's defense minister feels excellent about this negotiation. Oh my gosh. Brilliant. Do we keep Alaska? There are memes. Yeah. Cool that Putin's trip to Alaska will give his asset cover to do nothing on Ukraine for the next 3 months in anticipation of another meeting. So, no Nobel. Did Trump still give away to BJ Sinar? Oh my gosh. No Nobel Prize. What a huge disappointment. Yep. The president that promised to end the war in 24 hours. I'm so surprised. Well, it is what it is, isn't it? And what it is disappointment all around. Didn't Trump say that there will be severe consequences if it didn't go well? I think he did. Times now. Who else is covering stuff? Mercado Media. I think everybody's quite disappointed with what's happening. 24 hours is going to be a long time. We're still only about 2 days into the 3-day-long special military operation. And yeah, it's things are happening. Things are happening.